John, you want to mute yours.
Okay.
How do we mute it?
This is Joan Conover, Seven Seas Cruising Association. I flipped through one slide. I apologize for that. I don't want to try to mess with it because I've got too many controls running. This is our webinar for heading north to Maine. And we have six presenters, and then Rudy and Jill Sechez. I want to thank our sponsor, Nautica, for allowing us to have this happen. Rockland, Maine cruising hosts. Keith, Davie and Nicki Dunbar are home at Rockport, Maine. They are currently living as dirt dwellers. When they float, they are live aboard on Sienna, a 1963 Triangle 32 center cockpit ketch. They have anchored everywhere the full length of the ICW Keys, much of the Gulf Coast. They're experts at gently touching the bottom only once in New Jersey. You'll see them with their boat, and there they are down at the lower right side on the boat. Dick and Moria Bentzel, they've been sailing for 30 years. They have 35,000 nautical cruising miles, East Coast, US, Canada, Bahamas, Bermuda, Eastern and Western Caribbean. Both are SSCA Commodores since 2009, and they've recently retired as regional rear Commodores for Northeast Asia, Atlantic Canada for the Ocean Cruising Club, one of our partner groups. Future cruising plans includes a passage Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, plus returning to Cuba. I want to do that too, and the Western Caribbean. They sail Equinox, and you'll see their smiling faces at the lower right side. John and Deb Rapp. Deb's been sailing 45 years racing and supporting cruising programs. John's a pilot and a power boater with extensive cruising experience. You'd have to be with the miles they've sailed. 25,000 nautical miles from Grenada to Newfoundland, completing the Great Loop by way of Cuba and Haiti. They're headed to the Azores and Europe this June. And there'll probably be some questions about that. We'll talk about that at that event later. Their smiling faces are at the bottom of the screen. And then Rudy and Jill Sechez, living aboard and cruising. They built 2 boats, won their first cutter, and now they have a 36-foot sail-assisted trawler called Briny Bug. And if you see that little thing, she's adorable. It's their own design, also of wood. Trips have taken them to the Bahamas, Gulf Coast, Chesapeake, with a trip to Bermuda, up the Tennessee Tennessee rivers. They're authors and published authors in various magazines, and they are anchoring experts They have a book out called Anchoring a Ground Tackler's Apprentice. Our agenda, we're going to have a two-part agenda. One is the first part, Maine cruising, what to expect. We'll have a discussion on resources, distance, bays, communications, anchoring, sea conditions, weather patterns, wildlife, and sea life. Then we'll restart the group again, and then we'll talk about Maine passaging and meandering, approaches to Maine and the southern coast up to the bay, mid-coast through Penobscot Bay, and then Merchants Row through down east. At the end, we'll have a Q&A with chat. And the Q&A is at the bottom of your screen. You can chat and type in your questions, and we will answer them at the end. Chat, we will answer at the end so we don't get people kind of sideways while they're doing their slides. Rudy and Jill will be part of the Q&A to answer questions that you have, and they will answer the chat as well as the Q&A. And you see at the very bottom, link to webinars. This is being recorded live to SSCA's YouTube channel and will be stored after the fact on both YouTube and SSCA's Seven Seas Cruising Association, what we call the university, online on the SSCA site. So that's my part, and I'm going to turn this over to Dick and Moria, and they will take it over from here. Let me stop my share and let them come up. It takes a minute. And Dick and Moria, you need to unmute. And Dick and Moria, you need to unmute. Moria. We can't hear you.
We're back.
I think we're back now. Okay, well, we try to get set up. First of all, I just would like to say it's great to see so many people interested to come to the beautiful waters of Maine. We're longtime sailors and just love being able to do that. All of the panelists hope that the information that we give you tonight, first of all, gets you excited about sailing in the state, but more importantly, to help you with your planning and your preparation.
Maine is the largest, the third largest state on the East Coast, and it's also it's larger than the other 5 New England states combined. The coastline stretches from Kittery to Eastport, and as the crow flies, that distance is about 250 miles. But as you can see, the coast is very craggy, and if you follow the craggy shoreline through all of the bays and estuaries, you will find that we've actually got a coastline of 3,800 miles. There are 3,000 islands, over 3,000 islands in Maine, and 170 of them are inhabited, some only seasonally. We bring this up because we've heard some cruisers say they want to cruise the entire state of Maine in one season. Well, Maine sailing season is typically from mid-June to mid-September. We think this is about impossible to do the whole state in one season. So our recommendation would be to pick an area or a couple of areas of the state that you really want to concentrate on and really explore them and enjoy everything that Maine has to offer. When we cruise, we always carry paper charts. We tend to use the MapTech chart kit for Block Island to the Canadian border for ours. We like to use them. It makes it easier for us to plan using those. We also have used numerous electronic charts and find them all very accurate in the state. The cruising guides, the one that we use primarily in Maine is the cruising guide to the Maine coast by the Taps. It has a wealth of information, and it describes each and every anchorage and harbor, and gives a description of the history and some of the services available. It also has a rating of the harbor based upon protection and beauty. Other guides that we use are the MapTech New England Coast and the Waterway Guide Northern. Both of these cover more than just Maine, and they have a lot more information regarding marinas and services, also restaurants available within the state. Another resource that we use is the Maine Island Trails. They have set up a trail going up the state that it picks up over 200 islands, and they have created a guidebook and an app that give you a lot of information on each one of the islands. They also act as they've worked with the landowners and the and trusts to obtain access for people to use these islands, and they do the monitoring of or maintaining of some of the islands.
We're just going to put a plug in too, because MIDA is such a great organization and it's really starting to reach out to cruisers. Blue Water Sailing Club is going to have a webinar on and featuring MIDA, and it's going to have some beautiful pictures from some of the islands that are highlighted on the trail, and that's going to be happening April 22nd. So if you want to get more information about very specific islands, that may be something you want to consider to do. Having a boat in good working order and carrying necessary supplies is really important in Maine, especially if you are planning on doing a lot of cruising and way down east Maine. But you don't have to worry about getting all the supplies. You can go to several different chandleries in the state. West Marine has 2 stores in the state. Hamilton Marine is a Maine-based chandlery with 6 locations all along the coast. And we have found them to be very well supplied, good prices, and a really knowledgeable staff. Midcoast Marine Supply is another Maine-based chandlery. It's a little bit smaller and it tends to service mostly the Mid-Coast and Penobscot Bay. Defender is, even though it's in Connecticut, we tend to see lots of boxes in Harbor Master's office from Defender, and they generally get here fairly quickly. One of the reasons I bring this up, because you can get boat services and boat yards are pretty plentiful from the southern coast all the way up to about the Mount Desert area. And then after that, things are dwindling. So if you need parts, you know that you can get them here in the state. Now, Deb and John are going to be focusing much more on the weather. I just wanted to kind of highlight how you can actually get your weather forecasts. NOAA here in Maine uses 5 different channels on the VHF weather channels to make its broadcast its forecast. There are individual forecasts for both Casco Bay and then for Penobscot Bay, and then the rest of the state is broken down into really large geographic areas. Within each region, there will be 2 different forecasts depending on how far offshore you are. One is for the coastal waters up to about 25 miles, and then from 25 to 40 miles. Now, normally, as cruisers, we wouldn't really be paying attention to that longer range, 25 to 40 miles. but Maine has some outlying islands in the 20 to 25 mile range. And so if you're going to be heading that way, it's really important to be aware of the weather in both of those different areas, because sometimes they're actually quite different. So it's important to keep your eye on what that weather is going to be. I'm going to sort of end our portion of this with trying to answer a question that we get asked a lot, and that's about which is the best cellular provider in the state. And I think we've come up with the idea of it depends. Verizon, AT&T, and T-Mobile have all put ads in papers saying they are the best providers in the state. But all of them have these like black holes of no service, and it's not necessarily that it all happens for them in the same area. US Cellular was one of the first providers here in the state, but it's not well known outside of the state that much. And some people have raved about reception from Google Phone and TracFone. So our best suggestion is for you to maybe look at your provider's coverage map and zoom in on the area that you're thinking about being and just seeing where there may be gaps. There's a couple of other things that are really important for you to remember too about Maine. One of the things is that if you have the new 5G phone, you may not be able to utilize all the functions because you're working on an older system. And the other thing is that if you need dependable, high-speed internet in the state, maybe for work, you need to know that Maine lacks a really strong broadband system. So using a Wi-Fi booster may help, but not necessarily, and you may actually have to depend on an old standby, and that's the Maine library systems, because all of them have been set up with a strong internet signal. So think of that as maybe just having a wonderful opportunity for a Maine adventure as you try to go through the town searching for the library. You get to meet local folks and also may find out about things that are happening in that local area. And so what we'll do is we'll pass that over now to Keith and Nikki for some more information.
All right, Maura and Dick, thank you very much. And let's see here, let's see if I can pull up my slides and make it work. And there we go. So cruising the coast of Maine, and Dick touched on a little bit of how much territory there really is to cover in the state. I have seen estimates, depending on how you count the islands in Maine, we have 3,500 miles of coastline, and we might have 5,500 miles of coastline. So yes, allow yourself 2 or 3 years, probably worth of summers, and you might scratch the surface of it. We're kind of proud of that, actually. We are going to cover, initially at least, a few of the topics of concern that people have when they come to Maine. Concerns that I think are probably based in reality, but often exaggerated slightly by the conversations and the presence of a libation. Yes, we have big tides. Yes, we have lobster buoys. But those are the little things in Maine that just make it a little bit more interesting, perhaps. We'll start with the tides. And I'm speaking specifically about the mid-coast region. The tides in Maine do vary significantly as you go farther west. The tides get greater and greater. There are places down toward Eastport where you'll see 20-foot tides regularly. And of course, in the Bay of Fundy, which is a little bit farther east, 48 to 50 feet tides are possible. And that's a really good thing to know before you turn out the lights. But here in the mid-coast, our average tide range is 10 feet. Our maximum range, as far as I could find in my research, about 12 and a half. That's the highest that we personally have seen. Some of the things that work in our favor, though, is that almost all of the southern and mid-coast region is floating docks. And that means that you very seldom will have to deal with fendering your boat off of pilings, which, as we know from down south, can be challenging. And sometimes you just can't keep the fenders where you want them. Having a floating dock makes that much easier. You and the dock go up together. Your dock lines don't get all bent out of shape, etc. But another thing that we have in Maine is a hard bottom. If you come up the ICW, if you're used to cruising down in the southern states, you know that generally speaking, if you go aground, you're going to be hitting sand or mud. It's not that big a deal as long as you're paying attention. In Maine, the bottom is frequently granite, and granite does not give even a little bit. So we do want to be really aware of that fact, combined with a relatively high tide range means that you have to pick your anchoring spots pretty carefully. Another consideration is the tidal currents. And again, I'm speaking about the mid-coast region. In our tide ranges of at the most 12 feet, we still have quite a bit of water moving with every change in the tide. In Penobscot Bay, that can create a current in the bay itself of a knot to a knot and a half. Breathe in, breathe out every 6 hours. And of course, if you're in one of the rivers, if you go farther up the estuary, the amount of water moving is significant, and it's also moving very rapidly. There are places where you'll see 4 and 5 knot currents every tide cycle. So if you are anchoring in those areas, you have to be very aware that you're going to have a reversing current every 6 hours that you have to keep track of. Also, it has some effect when you're underway because the currents on a large body of water, again, talking about the Penobscot Bay, you're not aware when you're out there that there's a significant current running. It's not visible to you, generally speaking. However, it's still going to make a significant difference in your speed over the ground. It's going to make a significant difference in your velocity made good if you're sailing, particularly. Those currents are going to affect you. You point the boat where you are not going, similar to if you were going to cross into the Bahamas across the Gulf Stream. And finally, in nature of talking about the currents, it can create a significant amount of chop, particularly in the wider areas of the water, like the Penobscot Bay. Wind against current will set up a steep, nasty chop. It is not fun to beat into, and it's good to take that into consideration if the winds are significant. What are you adding? Your mumbling. Okay. And now we're going to get to lobster buoys, everybody's favorite topic. It's one of my favorite topics. The fly in the ointment in what is the paradise of Maine. That's the only poetry I'm going to do tonight. 5 things I'm going to talk about here, trying to keep it brief, but there's a lot of information. First is toggles, which is basically a double buoy system on each lobster trap or set of lobster traps. The variations in how the buoys are laid out and how the traps are laid out, both in terms of depth of water and seasonal variations. The use of line cutters, positives and negatives, because there are both. What to do if you catch a pot, how to disentangle. And finally, the consideration for the lobstering gear, the trap and the line and the floats, which are expensive. And these are, of course, the way the lobster people make their living. And just a little aside, what you're dealing with here is lobster buoys. The pot is actually the trap. And if you're dealing with the lobster traps, you are in shallow water. The key to avoidance in any case is constant vigilance. You have to be paying attention all the time when you're underway in Maine. That means that if you are in the habit of running under autopilot, you need somebody watching anyway. Somebody has to be doing a bow watch to avoid the traps. And usually we find it's a lot easier just to hand steer so that you don't have to worry about falling asleep and catching a trap. A couple of the tricks of the trade when you're up here in Maine, many people aren't aware of. Looking at the top of any lobster boat, you will find the color of the buoy that that lobster boat is working. And that means that if you see a lobster boat ahead of you, if you can see on the top of the boat what the color buoy is that they're looking for, you can then scan the water around them and probably figure out which direction they're going to move next. That can be really handy as you are obviously trying to stay out of their way. Something else to be aware of, in strong currents or exceptionally high tides, occasionally you will find that the buoys are below the surface. I know that's not a comforting sign, but it is possible. So in order to spot them, having a person at some elevation in the boat can help, just as you would if you're navigating in coral down south. But it's also possible to improve your visibility by wearing polarized sunglasses. They make it much easier for you to see the buoys in the water. So think about that. If the sunglasses you wear are not polarized, you might want to come up with a pair to help you out. And now the question of how do you avoid the lobster buoys? This scene looks relatively tranquil. Actually, it is. This was taken on a day when there was effectively no wind. However, if you look closely, you will notice that all of these lobster buoys are laying pointed in the same direction. And the reason for that is current. So there is a current coming from the right here, and it is pushing the buoys in that direction. If you look at that a little more closely, you'll discover that the line to the buoy is tied right here at this end, and underwater it runs this way. So obviously, if you're in a sailboat particularly, but any boat really, you don't want to be traversing over this area because that line is submerged in your path. So we tell you to do what's called passing up stick. This end of the buoy, most buoys, almost all buoys, have a stick on one end. The lobsterman uses that to pick the buoy up when they take up the track. If you pass on this side of the stick, there is no line on that side. That could be either, see that the buoy could be lying that way, either because of a current, as we have in this situation, or the wind, or both. These will all affect the buoys in one way or another. But this trick of passing up stick is a 99.8% guarantee to keep you out of trouble with the buoys. I'm going to clear these arrows real quickly. This picture does not tell us anything about toggles, and I believe that's where we get next. Oh, God. Thank you. Sorry about that. First time I've tried to use that tool. Toggles is the next thing. Toggles are used for two reasons. They are a second buoy on a single lobster pot or string of pots. This is the buoy over, oops, back up. This is the buoy over here in the corner. And where's my buoy? There it is. This buoy here, this slightly different shape, is a toggle. It's attached to this one by a line which runs slightly underwater. Again, we don't want to go here. This is a bad place to be. We now know that from all of these buoys, there's going to be one line leading down to the tracks. In this case, the line into the water is on this side. There's a line that connects the toggle and the buoy here between. The stick
is right here on this end, and passing up stick would take you all the way over to this location. I hope that's clear for everybody. Something else I'll point out in this slide, here's another set of toggles from the same lobster. Same color buoy on this end. This is the toggle, this is the buoy, and again, the line underwater is here and here. Two places to avoid. I think that's all I've got on this page as well. The number of buoys, and to some degrees their depth changes as the season moves along. As you get into deeper water, there tend to be fewer lobster buoys, and that's just because it's harder for the lobstermen to work that much gear. So in depths over 300 feet, which requires you to be considerably offshore in most of Maine, you will find fewer lobster buoys. Also, later in the season, the lobsters migrate away from the shore into cooler water, and the traps obviously are going to follow them. So later in the season, you may see there being fewer traps closer into shore. We can't guarantee that, but that may be the case. And now into a controversial subject, which is line cutters. If you're not familiar, a line cutter is simply a serrated knife that's mounted on your, I'm gonna do it again. It's mounted on your propeller shaft, just ahead of the propeller. If you pick up a line, it will be on this side of the propeller initially. If your propeller, if you are under power, so your engine is running and in gear, and you are making a fair amount of power, probably not just say motor sailing, but if you're under good power, this may cut the line that you've picked up and keep you from wrapping it around the propeller. It also may not. There are a lot of variables there. If you're at a lower power setting, there's a good chance it won't cut. And you still will end up picking up a line, which will wrap around your shaft right here. One of the things that happens in that situation is that the line, which is polypropylene, will overheat on the stainless steel shaft, and it will actually melt onto the shaft. That makes it really difficult to get off, not something you're going to be able to do probably just diving off of the boat. So my recommendation is to think of the line cutters as kind of a last resort. It may get you out of a bad spot that good pilotage would have kept you out of to start with. But it's not a free pass, and it doesn't allow you to just plow through and think nothing is going to happen. And finally, disentangling from lobster buoys, if you catch one, stop the boat and stop the motor as quickly as possible. Obviously, if you are in a tough situation where you need to continue trying to move to protect your boat, you'll have to do that. But there's a fair chance that you're actually going to be anchored once you pick up a line. Many of these lines have more than one trap on the bottom, and each trap weighs over 100 pounds. You're not going to drag that very far, very fast in most vessels. Once you've stopped the boat, that takes some of the pressure off the line. You may, with a boat hook, be able to push it off, get it down around your rudder. Obviously, if it's wrapped around the drive shaft, you're not going to be able to push it off, but you may not be that badly caught. If it's only around your keel, you might be able to back off it, but do so with caution so that you don't pick up something else in your propeller. If you have a good knife, and if you are a very good swimmer, and if you have a wetsuit, you may consider diving on the boat yourself to cut the line free. The water temperatures in Maine are not warm. It doesn't matter what time of year it is. We peak out at a temperature of 65 to 68 degrees generally. That's not water that you want to stay in for more than a few minutes without getting seriously cold. So the next option beyond that, obviously, is to hire a diver. That will require you to get the boat to shore in some way, but that's the decision that you'll have to make. And finally, on saving the gear, avoiding the lobster buoys is part of your job as a cruiser in Maine. Remember that these folks work very hard to make a living, and it's important that we respect that and do our utmost to protect all of their equipment. And I realize I'm going on a little bit. I'm going to try to keep this short. I'm going to talk about anchoring in Maine briefly. Rudy and Jill, I think it's Jill, are kind of our anchoring experts. They're going to be here for Q&A. They will correct any mistakes that they feel I make. But this is based on our experience cruising in Maine. We have a 32-foot center cockpit catch. We weigh in at about 14,000 pounds. And we are running almost exclusively, we run a CQR. We do that with a heavier than recommended chain because we like to make sure that anchor stock stays close to the bottom so that the anchor digs in. And we have had extremely good luck with this combination. We'll talk about bottom types briefly, anchor types. road types a little bit, scope considerations for the tidal ranges. Bottom types, we are coarse sand, coarse gravel, and occasionally cobble, which are even larger stones, depending on where you're located. We have firm and hard mud, particularly in many of the harbors. We have some grass, which is very resistant to anchors. And we also have some rocky areas. The sand and the soft mud that we were all used to down south and in the ICW is almost non-existent up here in Maine. We just don't have that kind of soft bottoms except in some unusual areas. Type of anchors, in my humble opinion, and I know that this is probably going to cause argument somewhere along the line, but our experience in Maine has been that most of the plow style anchors work reasonably well. The Mantis, the Rockna, I believe Dick and Moria use a Rockna, the Deltas, etc. We use a CQR, which is old technology, but has worked very well for us. Again, it will penetrate our bottoms pretty reasonably. There are occasions where the old style fisherman actually works really well, and that is in the heavy cobble, in rock, or in grass. Usually you can avoid those bottoms, so don't panic if you don't have a 70-year-old Harrishaw anchor on your boat. What we found does not work very well in Maine is the Bruce anchors. They work well in mud. They do not tend to penetrate our hard muds well here, and they do not like cobbles at all. And the Danforth anchors, which will frequently set reasonably well in Maine, but in a current change or a wind change, they often will get a stone caught in them and they will not reset. If you can find a bottom that's just mud, they would be wonderful. They're very secure, but generally speaking, they don't work in many areas of the state. And finally, road types. I recommend either all chain or a hybrid, say 75 feet of chain and then go to nylon. Partly because the bottom is frequently hard, and having that chain road will help keep the stock of the anchor low, help that anchor dig in properly. And partly because we have a lot of rock, and rock can be hard on line if it's dragging or getting wrapped around a stone on the bottom. A word about scope, only that we need to remember the amount of tidal change that we have. You're frequently going to be anchoring 25 to 30 feet of water at high tide. Many areas also experience a reversing current, as we talked about, particularly if you get into the river areas of Maine, as we call it, which is from the Casco Bay up until about Tennant's Harbor as you're entering Penobscot Bay. That area has a lot of estuary, a lot of river, but there's also a lot of moving water, which tends to make the bottoms a little bit less amenable to anchoring. So remember that in this type of depths, just a 3-to-1 scope is going to need a whole shot of chain, 90 feet. 5-to-1 scope, you need 150 feet out in order to sleep well. And sleeping at night is what it's all about for me. This is our pause point. I'm going to pass it off now to Deb and John. And thank you so much. Deb and John, go ahead and pick up.
Okay.
Oh, Sharon? Yeah.
I'm getting there.
They have to stop sharing first. You want. That's it. Okay. All right. Hi, everybody. I'm Debbie.
And I'm John.
And we're here to talk about the weather and the wildlife throughout the state of Maine. The weather can change really between coastal locations only a few miles apart. It can look really calm and sunny, and then you have to haul up the anchor, and 10 minutes out, it's starting to get foggy and cooler. The weather in Maine, we're going to also talk about prevailing winds, temperatures, rainfall, and fog. After that, we're going to talk about wildlife throughout Maine. There's so many things, though, that we can't cover them all. We're just going to cover some of them. Birds, dolphins, whales, seals, and more. Okay, next slide. The summer weather is generally pleasant temperatures, and you know, Maine is one of the nicest summer climates in the United States. On a typical summer day, the breeze is light in the morning, gradually building to 10 or 20 from the southwest, reaching its greatest strength in the afternoon and then diminishing before sunset. Perfect. Just in time to find the perfect quiet anchorage and enjoy sundowners. The temperatures, they're usually from 50 to 75, give or take 10 degrees. And the temperatures are modest during July and August. That is also when there's a lot of fog, though. Occasionally, there's a rare summer when nothing is normal, the sun is seldom, the fog lingers for days or weeks, and there's frequent winds of the north and northwest. But that's very abnormal. In the fall winds, though, they can be chillier. Now, the rainfall. If you look at that rainfall, only 75% of days with no chance of rain. When we spent 4 weeks cruising in Maine, one summer, we had only 5 days with rain. So summers can be lovely, not too hot, not too cold, and mostly moderate winds.
All right, next. From the pilot chart here, you can see the morning and afternoon wind roses for Brunswick, Maine. Winds are from anywhere east are usually going to bring fog or drizzle and gray weather. Winds from northwest are typically clearing winds following a cold front, sweeping moisture away, but they tend to be gusty, strongest right after the front has passed, tapers off, and shifts to southwest. Downdrafts and fluky winds are common around steep hills and mountainous shores, as north of Camden in the Penobscot Bay and Eggemogan Reach and Somes Sound on Mount Desert Island.
So it's really nice sailing there, except here's the weather that most cruisers are concerned about with Maine. Can you see the word fog? There's a fishing boat right where the word fog is, and it's about 2 boat lengths away. Can't see it. Fog is a fact of life on the coastal Maine, and it's fairly unpredictable. Everyone is moving quite slowly in the fog, except sometimes a lobster boat moves a little faster around you. They know the fog. So keep an ear on the sounds around you. You will hear them long before you see them. You know what fog is? Fog is formed by warm continental air flowing over colder waters, causing the moisture in the air to condense. And in Maine, it occurs when the prevailing southwest summer winds blow off the land, producing a smoky sou'wester. Our friend who lives in Booth Bay, he calls that smoke, he calls the fog sea smoke. I'm gonna try to play a quick movie. I don't know if I can.
Okay, we are under motor. There's not a drop of wind. It is 60 degrees. Oh, look, right there's a lobster floating. And this is what we see all around us. We are now in dense fog. We were just contacted by an Atlantic cat car ferry who told us they saw us on AIS and they were going to parallel and then pass in front of us. We didn't even see them pass in front of us because the fog, you can only see about 50 yards, maybe not even 50 yards. So here's what it looks like. We're in the Atlantic heading toward down east. Here's how it looks like.
Okay, your responsibilities in restricted or limited visibility. So if you're a power-driven vessel making way, about every 2 minutes, you give one long prolonged blast. In a vessel underway but stopped, every 2 minutes, 2 prolonged blasts in succession at intervals of about 2 seconds. And then a sailing vessel, sound intervals of not more than 2 minutes, 3 blasts in succession, 1 prolonged followed by 2 short blasts. Okay. Now, the marine radio activated sound signal system is in Maine, and it's is not activated naturally by water or wind, but by like some bells or whistles and horns. This system is activated by the mariner on his VHF radio. You can find these NOTAMs, these ATONs on your charts. So tune to VHF channel 81A or 83A, and then key your microphone 5 times in succession. And if you're within a half mile of the ATON, the sound signal will be activated for an hour.
Yeah, we tried that quite a bit. It's pretty cool. It works great.
John, one
And this
quick
chart
comment
here
on,
shows,
John, sorry, one quick comment on that.
Yeah.
It works significantly farther than a half a mile though. It's line of sight, just like your VHF radios. So 4 or 5 miles pretty reliably for most of them.
thank you. Thank you, Keith.
That's great.
All right, this chart here shows the amount of fog from Isle of Shoal up to Petite Manane, way down east, observed at US Coast Guard stations. As you can see, the hours of the fog signal in operation determine the amount of time there is a fog there. It increases from 25 hours to almost 300 hours up at Petite Manane in 1 month. So in other words, in July, fog is most prevalent, and the farther down east you go, the more fog you can encounter.
Okay, here are our suggestions for coping with fog. Follow the buoys with the sound signals. And now we know they go a little further, even though it didn't say that on the MRASS site. Use your horn, set the bow watch, especially if you have others on board with you. Use radar, AIS, get a good compass reading. Call security, etc., to notify location. Security, security, security. This is sailing vessel Mahayana. We're at so-and-so location, traveling in this direction. Please be aware. And then the next one is keep your VHF on, but reduce other sounds aboard so you can really hear. And beware, the fishermen don't always use radar, AIS, or horns. So watch out and listen for them. You'll hear them. If necessary and you feel uncomfortable, you stay at anchor. So in summary, weather in Maine, the summers are lovely. You must come and visit. And now we're going to go into our part on wildlife. Wildlife by John Rapp.
Right. Okay, the lobster is the most prevalent animal in Maine and the most delicious. There are lots of lobster festivals and tours if you're interested. Wild food is abundant on the coast, and you can forage for berries, mushrooms, dig for clams, but leave the lobster fishing to the fishermen. Although lobsters are the primary fishery in Maine, there are lots of other wildlife to be found and places to explore for them. More than 400 coastal islands are used for hundreds of species of nesting colonies of seabirds and water birds. The common black cormorant does not have oil glands in his feathers like ducks, so the water soaks their feathers and they stand sopping wet, so you can often see them drying their wings. Mergansers are in the duck family, just look at their feet. And although not as prevalent as many of the other birds, we captured this shot of these pretty guys on Hall Island in mid-coast.
The lovely guillemot is one of the birds that is fairly easy to identify. They've got black bodies and then they're highlighted with that distinct bright white patch. They're found along rocky shores of Maine and northern Atlantic states. This bird may be seen swimming and diving around rocky shores. In many areas of the coast of Maine, they have nesting grounds high up on rocky cliffs, like the ones near Halifax Island, near the Roke Island archipelago down east. They can dive up to 600 feet. They're really fun to watch. So we kept an eye open for them. And everybody's favorite, puffins. Now, Cornell and the National Audubon Society have reestablished a colony of puffins on Easter Egg Rock, Muscongas Bay, and that's where that's located. And it's the most southerly nesting ground for these strange and wonderful birds with their colorful beaks and their comical postures. This is where you can find them, but you have to look before August 15th. After then, they leave and migrate. Eastern Egg Rock in Muscongas, Machias Sea Island, we'll show you later. That's up in down east. And Matinicus Rock, which we're going to show you right now. This is Matinicus Rock Wildlife Refuge. It's one of the many coastal island refuges where many birds can be seen. Located southeast of Matinicus and Ragged Island, the rock is 15 miles south of Vinyl Haven. It's an impressive place, one of the outermost locations, but it's best to just sail around it like we did. Landing is mostly not allowed. We did spot this one puffin flying among the gulls on Matinicus Rock. There are also, you'll see gulls, of course. There were lots of them on Matinicus. Ospreys, bald eagles, terns, loons, razorbills, and gulls. And there's lots more. It's a wonderful bird refuge. If sometimes you have that strange feeling that you're being watched, look behind your boat and you may see a harbor seal. Seals are irresistibly appealing, the most fun of all the wildlife. Their curiosity can bring them right up to your boat, and their black eyes follow you with their cute little heads and whiskers, almost like a pet, which is why we have heard them called water dogs. There are many varieties of seals. Thousands of them live in Maine. The harbor seal being the most common, along with gray seals, harp seals, hooded seals. But the harbor seal can be seen swimming around coastal ports, bopping his head up to get a better look at what's going on around him. And of course, they love nesting on sunny rocks. And sometimes they're playing who's the king of the castle, jockeying for the best position and knocking each other around.
Okay, here we've got a chart that shows 6 whales that might be sighted in the Gulf of Maine, shown on the same scale as a 43-foot cruising catch. The water lines indicate the part of the whale usually seen above water. From left to right, humpback, orca or killer whale, minke, finback, right, and pilot whales. Here's a great shot near Mount Desert of a humpback, which has rolled onto its back and is waving with its pectoral fins. The more usual photos of humpback is when they dive underwater. The whales can be individually identified by the particular markings on their tail flukes, and it's an amazing sight to spot a whale while sailing the ocean in your own sailboat. You just have you and the whale and the sea in a shared experience. It's magical. Now, this last slide is a rare wildlife animal that some of the—
Wait, we have to get this slide.
Oh, I'm getting ahead of myself. So on land side, you've got bear, coyote, deer, bobcat, moose, beaver, etc., all to be found ashore in Maine. All right, now this last slide is a rare wildlife animal that some of you may recognize. Land shark. Haha. If you don't know what that is, you're too young enough to remember the old episodes of Saturday Night Live.
So that concludes our presentation on weather and wildlife. Visit Maine.com will give you a lot more information, and we hope you do visit Maine.
Enjoy.
Now we'd like to turn it back over to the famous Mora and Dick.
Thanks, Deb and John. Let's see, can you unshare?
Yep.
So while we're trying to get set up, we've heard some really great information about things that you need to know, what to do in Maine. Now we've got to work on getting you there. Unless you are planning to go way offshore, east of Cape Cod, to arrive in Maine, you're going to find yourself in Buzzards Bay, waiting to go north. So one of the things that most cruisers tend to do is they find a harbor or an anchorage near the canal to stage for going through. Some of the places that we have done that in include Onset, Pocasset, and even an anchorage near Barrett's Island. There's definitely other places to think about, but we have found them fairly easy to then continue in through the canal.
When planning your passage through the Cape Cod Canal, you really want to catch the easterly flood current, which takes you from Buzzards Bay into Cape Cod Bay. The currents in the canal can reach 6 knots. So it is imperative that, at least for our boat, it's imperative that you go with the current. The best way to determine the tidal currents, I like to use iTides. There are any number of other apps that will help you with tides and currents. You can also Google the Cape Cod Canal and find the Army Corps of Engineer website. They have they have all of the tidal charts for the year, plus the plus all the rules and regulations that go along with them. Eldridge is another guide that has the same type of information. It's best to use the guide for the current year that you're going through. Otherwise, you could get into some real problems. There are certain rules that apply, and most of the rules are for the 7-mile land cut section of the canal where the currents are the highest. What you must motor through the canal, and you may have your sails up, but you must motor. Vessels moving with the current have right-of-way. If you need to, you should monitor channel 13 all the way through. If you want to call the traffic controller, you would do that on channel 16. Boats are required to do the 7-mile passage in 2.5 hours. If it looks as if you're not going to do that, the controller may send a tug out at your expense to push you along. The only bridge that you will encounter that's of an issue is this railroad bridge, which is on the western end. The railroad bridge remains.
Pardon me, Dick, excuse me. Are you sharing screen or intending to? Did you have pictures?
Yeah.
We're not seeing them. We're not seeing them.
Okay, hang on a second.
Let me go. I'm going to hit this. No, I'm going to hit this.
My fault. I thought you were not sharing.
That's it.
Oh,
There you go.
Free?
Well,
Okay, we keep hitting share screen and, oh,
Oh, no. Okay, hit now this.
You're up and working there.
okay, thanks. What I'm gonna do is sort of go back. And just so that folks can see what the canal looks like. And then this is the 7-mile land cut that Dick was talking about. And one of the reasons Dick made the comment about Eldridge is we looked and we could only find the one from 2013. So you definitely want to use the most current one.
And this is the railroad bridge. And it remains up until a train approaches, and then they'll lower the bridge for the train. When the bridge is down, it's got a 7-foot clearance, and you are not allowed to pass under it. But you will hear about it on channel 13.
Okay, so once you have successfully exited through the canal, you need then to make 2 different choices on how you're going to head to Maine. One is an offshore route and the other one is a coastal route. Since you can head directly from the canal to Maine, if you choose the offshore route, you will be doing an overnight passage, and distances can range from about 100 miles up to 150, depending where on the coastline you want to arrive. You're going to be sailing over Stellwagen Bank, which is a marine sanctuary and host to a lot of different species of sea creatures. And this is also an area, and it's sort of right in here. This is known for sightings of humpbacks and also the very endangered right whale. There was just a notice that came out today that said they've just spotted 80 right whales, which is the highest number they've seen in a really long time. So that's a good sign that hopefully that they're going to be making a comeback. One of the things we just usually want to point out is that if we're doing an offshore passage from here, we usually try to time our approach to the main waters up in here so that we arrive in daylight, so that we can avoid the lobster buoys for all the reasons that Keith had pointed out. So if you decide to do the coastal route, which would be coming up this way, there are lots of choices of both harbors and some major cities, but also small anchorages. And what we're going to be doing is just trying to highlight some of the ones that we really like. If we're doing a coastal route, then we tend to choose, once we exit the canal, to head over to Provincetown, which is on the very end of the curve of Cape Cod. This is kind of a quirky, fun town to visit. It has a very small, compact, and very colorful downtown area with lots of and miles of sandy beaches. This is the Pilgrim Monument, and it is well worth the climb of 116 steps and 60 different ramps so that you can be able to come up here and you can get a panoramic 360-degree view of things, of the Cape, the Atlantic Ocean, and sometimes as far away as Boston. It has a fairly large harbor, and the mooring field keeps expanding. You can successfully anchor beyond the mooring field and over near the breakwater.
About 50 miles north of Provincetown is Cape Ann. There are two major anchorage areas there, Gloucester and Rockport. Gloucester is has always been a maritime, has a long maritime history, and it's still a very heavily working harbor. It's there's museums and lots of fine restaurants with with today's catch usually on the menu. The anchorage in Gloucester, you can anchor in the larger major harbor, but you can also go inside to the to the inner harbor, and at the inner harbor, it's quite tight, and you can only fit a few boats anchored there. There are a lot of town moorings. The other harbor is Rockport. Rockport is an artist colony. It's known for this red fish shack that's probably been photographed more than any other fish shacks in the country. The town has many galleries lining all the little narrow roads that pass through the town. You can get, the harbor master probably could get you a mooring in the harbor here. We tend to anchor outside It's north of Bearskin Neck, Bearskin Neck, and it's in Sandy Bay, and that's our boat anchored there, basically off the beach. We find that very nice. When you sail out of Rockport or Cape Ann, one place you definitely don't want to miss is the Isle of Shoals. This is a picture of the Isle of Shoals. It became, I guess it was discovered in the 1600s by Captain John Smith, became a cod fishing area. And then in the late 1800s, a group came in and built a resort. It's the Oceanic House, and it's got a great porch. We've gone in there and bought ice cream and sat in rocking chairs on the porch, just overlooking the harbor. It was lovely. It's a great place. The anchorage is really the bottom is pretty foul from what we've heard. So we've never tried to anchor in the harbor. It's called Gosport. Half of this harbor is actually in Maine, and the other half is in New Hampshire. So this is our boat is on a mooring. The moorings are owned by yacht clubs on the mainland, and they allow you to use their moorings. However, you have to, if they arrive, they may ask you to get off. We have never had that issue because we never go there on the weekend. And so we thoroughly recommend a stop there.
So hooray, welcome to Maine, the way life should be. When you start sailing along the southern coast of Maine, it's going to be very, very different than most of the other way shore that you will see further down east. 90% of all of the sand beaches and almost all of the salt marshes are in this part of the state. And so one of the things that you're going to find is that there are fewer safe anchorages along this strip, and that if you want to go into one of the harbors, you usually cannot anchor at all. You're going to need to be on a mooring or in a slip because of the really tight areas. If you do try to use one of the anchorages, we really highly recommend you checking Active Captain and see what the most current reviews of the area is. There is one stop that we do make along that part of the coastline, and it's called Richmond Island. It's just to the south of Cape Elizabeth. And we do that sometimes for two different reasons. One is if we're planning not to go into Casco Bay and continue to sail east, this is a great staging area to do that. The other thing is if it's getting really dark and you are going into Casco Bay and are a little concerned about entering at dark, again, this is a really nice choice to do that. There's a breakwater here, and you can anchor on either side of it depending on the prevailing wind. Now, there are some sandy beaches, and this is a privately owned island, and you're allowed to go ashore, but they ask that you do not leave the beach area. So now when you start entering into Casco Bay, the first thing that will greet you is the beautiful Portland headlight. It's just spectacular. And if you're in this area, it's always nice to take a trip to see it. Portland, Maine's largest city, is in Casco Bay, and it's noted for both its fishing vessels, and it's also a major shipping port. So traffic can get pretty busy during the day. The other thing is that Portland is a really vibrant area, but you wouldn't get that feeling from our only picture of Portland on a really dreary, rainy day.
This morning,
Yeah.
actually.
But the old port is a great spot to explore with the cobble streets. And if there's any foodies that are in the audience, then Portland typically ranks in the top 10 in the country for its wide variety of different restaurants. So you could spend days exploring it, and it has all the services that you might need for the boat. It's also a place to consider if you need to change crew or have crew come in. There's an airport right there. Now, this is just a small segment of the chart for Casco Bay. And one of the things we mentioned is, yes, it can be very easy, but the bay is so large, it can get, you can get really secluded anchorages. Now, this is the area where Portland is, and there's no anchoring allowed down in this part of the harbor. If you want to anchor, you can come along here. It's called the Eastern Promenade. But expect to kind of rock and roll, because there's a lot of the commercial traffic as well as the ferries that go to several of the populated islands in Casco Bay. There are definitely transient moorings available, and then there are also slips because there's 4 marinas on both sides of the harbor. This is just one view from the Eastern Promenade, and you can begin to see the extensive amount of islands that are in Casco Bay. You could spend weeks just going from island to island and exploring. And we'd really encourage you, if this is an area that you want to explore, to actually do that. Each island is really unique and has different features. On one island, you can climb up to a World War II tower that was used for searching for submarines. On another island, there's these beautiful meadows with a lot of wildflowers that you can go through. One island we would recommend you taking a look at, and this would be a day stop, is Eagle Island. It's now a state park, but at one point it was the home of Admiral Peary, the discoverer of the North Pole. And in the house, there's a lot of artifacts that he used during that type of exploration. It's also a great picnic spot, and there's a nice trail that goes around the entire island. So we'd encourage you to explore this really neat area. But if you choose not to spend much time in Casco Bay, then you're going to start moving into the mid-coast and Penobscot Bay area. And Nikki and Keith are going to be talking about that.
All right, thank you, Dick and Moria.
We are trying to stop the share.
Let me try this.
Yeah. Okay, successful.
There you go. Well done.
You got it.
All right. So we are going to be focusing our attention on what we call the Mid-Coast region, beginning basically at the eastern end of Casco Bay, around the city of Bath, up through the island of Isle Ho, which is the kind of the western extreme of the Penobscot Bay, correction, eastern extreme of the Penobscot Bay, sorry. Attempted to come up with some actual charts of the region rather than using these illustrations, but unfortunately, it's a lot of area to cover, and it's very difficult to get charts that actually cover the area, but actually give enough detail to be interesting. So I've kind of cheated. This is an illustration from the Taft Cruising Guide to Maine, which is my favorite in terms of Maine cruising guides specifically. That and a current copy of the Eldridge Tide and Pilot makes me very happy. Feel like I've got pretty much everything I would need to have aboard. The only exception to that might be the active captain information. But actually in our case, since active captain was sold, we have not resubscribed. So that information isn't available to us anymore. And I'm going to be a little bit more general in my approach than Dick and Moria were. They have some beautiful photos and some specific recommendations. And although we have some favorite spots, this area again is so extensive that I don't feel like I can really do it justice point to point in the time we have available. So we're going to divide it kind of into two sections. And the first will be here, what I call the river section, which is basically from Casco Bay's end to the beginning of Penobscot Bay. There are some lovely spots through here where anchoring is both possible and recommended. But the characteristics of this area are quite different than both the Casco Bay and Penobscot Bay. Part of it is because it's entirely made up of river and estuary. And that means that there's a huge amount of water moving in and out twice a day, as we've already talked about the tides, and particularly on the ebbs, there's some very strong currents. 3 to 4 knots is common, and in some of the narrower cuts, 7 to 8 knots is quite possible. It's almost like Hellgate going down through the New York City area. What that has done over time, of course, is that it has scoured the bottom in the areas where the water is moving the quickest. That means that in the river channels, anchoring is iffy at best, pretty much not recommended unless you have some local knowledge for a specific spot. Getting off of the main river channels, you may very well be able to find some lovely areas. We have right in this area, Southport Island and the Sheepscot River. On the left side here is Robin Hood Cove. This area has some great anchoring. Over on the right-hand side here is Love Cove and, oh, what's the name of that whole area? Starts with an M and it's escaping me. However, many of these, what look like good anchorage areas, are gradually filling in with moorings. And even our current active captain information has suggested that anchoring would be lovely down in this area off of Southport Island, when in fact it was entirely moorings and aquaculture. There was nowhere that we felt that we could actually drop an anchor in there, much to our surprise, as it was the end of a rather long day. Keep that in mind. I think in many of these areas where moorings are becoming more common, private moorings, and aquaculture is really taking off in Maine. There are oyster farms, mussel farms, etc., that are becoming more and more popular. Wonderful products. So if you have an opportunity to buy, do enjoy, but they do take up some ground where we used to be able to anchor. And I think I will just go ahead and move along on this. And I suggest the cruising guides really to find the spots you want to visit. Here we're getting into the Penobscot Bay proper, where we will find, in terms of characteristics, generally lighter currents. I spoke about that a little bit earlier. There are exceptions to that where you have a passage between a couple of islands, you'll still see a fair amount of water moving. But with the general lighter currents, it means you'll also tend to find a bottom more amenable to anchoring generally. And what you also have in the Penobscot Bay is a plethora of available services. There are marinas and marine service industries located really throughout the Penobscot Bay. Tennant's Harbor and Port Clyde area, Rockland, Rockport and Camden would be the biggest and most active boating centers, I think, on the western shore. followed closely by Belfast, which has a very high capacity marina, a high capacity haul out facilities, if that were something that you needed. And then we get onto the eastern shore. Castine is quite good, lovely town, decent services, although not to the extent of Rockland and Rockport. Down through Stonington is mostly a fishing village, and this whole area of Stonington, Deer Isle, and Isle of Ho, a lot of lobster activity going on, a lot of fishermen out working. And then we get to, this is North Haven Island and Vinyl Haven Island. The anchorage opportunities in these areas for relatively secluded but sheltered anchorages, it just abounds. It's a wonderful place to spend some time. That's also true of Islesboro Island, particularly up in this area here, which is a Dark Harbor area. And I can't remember the name of this bay. Gilkey Harbor, sorry, Gilkey Harbor area. Good anchoring in there as well in a hard mud bottom. Our personal home base is Rockland, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about Rockland shortly because Nikki and I are also the SSCA cruising station hosts for Rockland. And there's a little information about us, noting especially that the email is here where you can contact us. If you're planning on coming to Maine and would like to have somebody here who can receive mail, who can help you find services in the Rockland area, who can help you get transportation, etc. That's what we're here for as the cruising station hosts. And we would be happy to hear from you. Email is the easiest way for you to get a hold of us. And once we're in contact, we can share phone numbers, etc., as seems worthwhile. I mentioned a couple of the things that we do as the cruising station hosts. Mail and parcel handling is one of them. We are happy to receive parcels and hold them for you, to receive US mail and hold it for you. And we can share the address that's appropriate for that when you contact us. We have quite a bit of local knowledge about the Rockland, Rockport, Camden area particularly, and some knowledge of the islands and the eastern part of the Penobscot Bay as well. And always happy to communicate and share that. Rockland itself has a number of chandleries. Maura and Dick mentioned Hamilton Marine, and there's a store right here in Rockland of Hamilton's. There's also another one up the coast just a little bit more in Searsport. And there are 3 full-service marinas plus a couple of somewhat more limited marinas in the area as well, where moorings are available, haul out, repairs, everything from engine to rigging, etc. So we pretty much got it covered in terms of boat services. See again?
And we also have room to anchor easily 1,000 boats right
Oh,
here
yeah.
in the harbor. So
Yeah, it is a big harbor with a firm mud bottom generally. So in addition to the moorings, as Nikki says, there's a great deal of anchoring room. And we actually in the past have hosted the SSCA Down East GAM right here in Rockland Harbor as well. Anything else? We did have one individual in the comments that asked about bicycling, folding bikes and the folding luggage carts for getting groceries, both of which I can hardly recommend, although there is also a local commercial transport which operates all throughout the Rockland area in terms of getting to grocery stores, the chandlery, etc. So that's something else that is available, and we can certainly give people information about that. This is a picture that was taken in Love Cove that I mentioned, just west of us a little bit down in the rivers area. And it's been unretouched. It is not Photoshopped. It's just a gorgeous place to be. And that's the end of our talk. I'll turn this back over now. I believe we go to Deb and John again.
Hey, thank you, Keith. That was really great. Appreciate it. We're going to talk about coastal Maine, from Merchants Row to Mount Desert, Acadia National Park, and then down east as far as Rogue Island. I know I heard Maura say Mount Desert.
Hey, Deb, you aren't transmitting. Turn on your.
Can you hear us? Okay. I'm okay now?
Yes, you are.
Yes. Okay, we're going to talk about Maine from Merchants Row to Mount Desert. I heard Maura call it Mount Desert, and I know it's pronounced either way. A lot of people that we know that live there use both, so I don't know what's going to come out of my mouth. We're going to talk about Acadia National Park, and then we're going to mention all of our favorite places that we like, but there's so many that we're only going to talk about the ones that we really wanted to emphasize. We're going to go as far as Rogue Island down east. There are way too many to show them all. Some of our favorite anchorages and activities on land we're going to mention too. The archipelago of Merchants Row is several islands, 30 or 40 of them, which lie between Deer Isle and Isle de Haut. The main cruising guide describes this area called Merchants Row as, quote, unsurpassed for beauty anywhere in Maine. The islands are darkly wooded. They have views. Oh, the views are amazing through Merchants Row. We've seen a lot of schooners there. And the islands are darkly wooded, and they're fringed with white and pink sloping granite shores with tight passages winding through them, which makes them really beautiful. There are graceful schooners that can be seen everywhere in Maine, but we saw a lot of them in Merchants Row. The photo ops are endless, especially when you come into anchor near a schooner having a raft off party. And these people for schooners were actually swimming in the water.
Okay. Deer Isle Thoroughfare and Merchants Row, running to the north and south respectively, of the splendid Merchant Row archipelago are two of the three major passages from East Penobscot to Jericho Bay. The third one is Egmogan Reach, and we'll show you Stonington, which is where the red dot is here on the chart. The Granite Quarry Shore near Crotch Island, which is the blue square. And then the moving eastward past Camp Island, the green triangle, which is where we have anchored several times. And then, then it's from there on to Mount Desert. So here's picturesque Stonington, known as a frontier town of Maine. It's along Deer Island Thoroughfare, and it's a must-see with restaurants such as the Harbor Cafe. There's a chandlery there. There's fishing gear, opera house, and repair shops. It's a working harbor where lobstermen rule, and they want to keep it that way. So be considerate and stay out of their way. A town ordinance gives commercial fishing boats first choice of moorings in the mooring field, followed by passenger vessels, and then pleasure boats come in after that. And so it's best to anchor nearby Crotch Island, and it's still convenient to Stonington. If you arrive in Stonington on the 3rd or 4th Sunday in July, you could catch the high-speed lobster boat drag racing down the Deer Island Thoroughfare. So keep your eyes open for that. All right, between 1870 and 1925, granite was produced from the quarry on Crotch Island. Some granite went to Rockefeller Center, the Smithsonian, and New York City bridges. Jacqueline Kennedy chose the pink granite for the JFK Memorial coming from Crotch Island. Maine granite has also built many sites in Washington, such as the House of Representatives. Camp Island, where we have anchored in the past, is a good spot to anchor before beginning the sail to Acadia National Park and with Mount Desert Island smack in the middle. They're very favorite parts of Maine. Next one. The Egmogan Reach hosts the famous Wooden Boat School of Boat Building, their store, and this is where the well-read Wooden Boat magazine is created. It's a great spot to spend some time. Their anchorages and moorings are nearby.
Okay, now in this next part, we are entering the Acadia National Park where there's Mount Desert. The red line shows the path from the Camp Island anchorage to the entrance into Mount Desert that we took. And it's a magnificent view, mountains and the islands and high peaks as you enter along the coast and head right into the mountainous Mount Desert. Passing Southwest Harbor, you can see the Hinckley Boat Company with their characteristic boats at anchor. They're beautiful. And then, whoops, we dropped our page. Sorry.
There we go.
Mount Desert Island is divided right down the middle by Somme Sound. Now, technically, this is the only fjord on the eastern Atlantic seaboard, and a cruise up Somme Sound is exhilarating. It can be challenging. It's got funneling winds and downdrafts and currents, but it is so worth the ride. At the head of the sound, this is the fjord. You can see we hiked up a lot of areas to take great pictures. At the head of sound is Somes Harbor, and then there's the little village of Somesville, and that is the perfect anchorage. And we use this location as our base for exploring at Acadia National Park. There's a little dinghy dock where donations are accepted by the caretakers and a short stone road walk up to the main road, where the free buses will take you anywhere in Mount Desert. We stayed there for 10 days. We saw all of Acadia National Park.
Okay, here's the bus route that we're part of the bus routes that we talked about. It gives us information on which buses to catch. You can take different sections of the park. For hikers, it's an adventure with unsurpassed views from the top of several peaks. Mount Acadia was our first challenge, and it was a thrill for Debbie as she's gone through 2 joint replacements and wasn't sure she could do it. We both made it to the summit, however.
Yeah.
There are so many little villages with their special attractions. We can only mention a few, like Northeast Harbor, Southwest Harbor, Somesville. They're all great spots. Of course, the main port of entry on is the busy tourist town of Bar Harbor, pronounced Bar Harbor. And there are, you can see one of the bars here in the photograph. Yeah. There are very few docking options available, however, especially in their busy month of August, because there's cruise ships, excursion boats, whale watching tours, schooners coming and going through the crowded wharfs. There's some moorings by reservation only and limited dockage on the piers and floats. Some good holding for anchoring, but watch the ebb. It runs over the bar.
You can see the bar right there.
Yep. And here's a picture. The black arrow shows the main bar between the city of Bar Harbor and Bar Island. You can walk over it at low tide.
The town square in Bar Harbor is surrounded by blocks of souvenir shops and ice cream parlors, lots of them, and lots of tourists. It has a gazebo in the center where local musicians gather to entertain in weekly band concerts. And it was such a lovely experience there. If you decide not to climb up, you can catch the trolley car ride up to the top of Cadillac Mountain. That's a must. You have to see the sunset with the spectacular views of the islands. You can see the ocean. It is really something to see. And don't miss taking a photo at the sunset up at the top of Cadillac Mountain. Thunder Hole is another interesting geological stop along the bus route in Southeast Mountain Desert Island. And that's Thunder Rock again. We were climbing all over and up on top of the rocks. And our last place we're going to tell you about is Jordan Pond. Jordan Pond was, we were told we couldn't leave Maine without going to Jordan Pond. And so we went. We took a bus there. The famous and incredibly delicious popovers. They're indescribable. You'll just have to find out for yourself why. So don't leave Maine without one. And so ends our tour of Acadia National Park, and onward we go to the area described as the Bold Coast, down east.
Okay, It would be interesting to see how many of you who haven't been to Maine know what down east actually means. Sailors use their schooners to haul goods to and from the coast of New England. While moving in a northeasterly direction, a strong wind would often be at their backs, moving downwind in the direction that the prevailing wind was blowing. Since the sailors and their ships were also moving in an easterly direction, one can understand how the two terms, down and east, would have been combined or even merged together as an expression of the direction of traveling that was in common. Okay, so leaving Mount Desert Island and the national park, you pass Schoodic Point and you enter a more primitive world. It's all about lobster fishing down east, and yachts and facilities are almost non-existent. Wildlife is abundant, and so are dense fogs and high tides. There are remote anchorages and pink granite coastlines. A few cottages and cabins can be seen from the shores on the way to one of the prettiest white sandy beaches this far east. The Roque Island archipelago includes a variety of islands and anchorages. Sailing into the mile-long beach is one of the ultimate goals of a cruising sailor. We were surprised to see a few other sailboats on the beach, and they hailed us to a boat party upon arrival. Well, it was a wonderful way to say goodbye to Maine as we were starting our journey across the Atlantic to Shelburne, Nova Scotia. The next morning, we were engulfed in fog as we passed the lighthouse, never saw a thing for 2 days until we arrived in Shelburne Harbor. It was challenging, but by then we were used to it and it was no problem at all. In a way, we actually started to enjoy the fog and the sounds of the water and other seen and unseen buoys and boats.
In closing, we'd like to say, come to Maine for the adventure, but remember, Maine has the most memorable SSCA games and raft-off parties in Rockland for having fun with new and old friends and learning how to eat lobster. Check out that raft-off party. It's famous. And also you can learn how to eat lobster properly. That's our 7 C's GAM. And I just want one more thing in closing. For really good times, you got to catch some of the music. I'm not sure if it's coming through.
Yeah, sure it is. There's Captain Jim.
Captain Jim. Some of our sailing friends, like Steve there, joined in. And then finally, remember, the journey is the destination, just like the shirt says. Thank you for listening to our presentation. And now I'm turning it back to Joan.
John and Deb, thank you so much. Thank you, Dick and Moira, Keith, Davie, Nicki Dunbar, our hosts up there in Rockland, Maine. I hope we can do a GAM someday. I don't know we're ready yet this year, but maybe people can meander up and say hello and socially distance. We're getting our shots. We're trying to be safe. We are really going to miss getting together. Now, I'd like to open a question and answers. We have some question and answers at the bottom. We have a few on the chat. Most of them have been answered. But I would like anyone who has questions for Rudy and Jill to speak. But Rudy, would you and Jill give a few comments on, you saw the anchoring situation that everyone is facing up there. Do you have any suggestions? Handling the rocks, getting anchors up?
We always come back to the basics. A big anchor, one that's designed for the bottom, and a lot of scope.
Okay.
Keith had some good suggestions though when he talked about the anchors. Those really, especially when you talk about the fisherman anchor, that's one of our favorites for those types of bottoms too, those challenging weedy bottoms and the rocks.
One thing I'd like to mention, we've heard repeatedly about the high currents in the area, but to put that in perspective, a 6-knot current is equivalent of about a 15-knot breeze or wind, depending on your perspective. So it doesn't have to be that scary if you have the right equipment and you use it properly.
Well, thank you for that. And thank you for backing Keith up, because I know he was like, whoa, anchoring. We have a question, 3 questions, and then I'll go to the chat. Dave Smith about the need to activate fog signals via VHF. I think we answered that live in your slides. I think that was John and Deborah. And then one
That's
in
correct.
3 question from Dana Sims. How do you determine whether you can or can't go ashore? Is it in the charts? Who wants to answer that one?
I guess we can take that. Certainly, the Taft Guide, especially the newest edition, Dick had mentioned there's now a 6th edition out, and Maine Island Trails for the islands will give you that information about whether you can go ashore or not. I don't know if people are thinking about just to be able to go and explore, or if they're looking then to be able to use that landing to be able then to do shopping and things like that. Don't forget there's harbors all the way around. So you're going to be able to get into a town. There's usually a town dock, and from there you can get access to land.
Well, thank you very much for that. We have another question. How high is it when it's open, from Tony and Lisa? I think they're talking about the railroad bridge across the Cape Cod Canal.
That's 135 feet when it's open.
Okay, so I don't have a problem with my mast. Okay, so that's the end of the questions. But now we have some in the chat. And one of the questions, let's see, everybody likes it. And then a question on buses running year round. I think that was for Keith. You were talking about buses in Rockport or Rockland.
I believe that one came in during the discussion of MDI that Deb and John did. And actually, Nikki just heard yesterday that the buses in MDI are now running on a limited basis. So that would be something to check probably online. I would expect probably Bar Harbor Chamber of Commerce would have that sort of information. But the buses have started again, in fact.
Can I just follow up on that? Because I did check, and there's 2 things that people need to be aware of. Because of COVID, they didn't run at all last year. This year, they are starting, it's limited. They may not go to as many places, and they're also limiting the number of people that are going to be riding on the bus. And I know cruisers usually when they're on the island really depend for the buses. So that's going to be something real important that they keep following up on. Certainly Maine has started to relax some of the COVID restrictions, but we've just seen an uptick in the numbers. And so that may delay things a little bit more. So I think that's going to be a situation that you have to be constantly monitoring.
Yeah, we have that same issue down the Caribbean because boats are trying to start migrating and they're closing things down. It's because of the spread of COVID suddenly. Okay, so George Van Drossik, and I apologize for my pronunciation of names. I'm old, I'm bad with names. To all panelists, why did you leave from Rouge Harbor for Shelburne? Why not from Mount Desert Island? And I guess that was for Deb and John.
Right, that was us. You certainly can go from Mount Desert Island to Nova Scotia. That's not a problem. We just wanted to have more of a down east experience, and we knew that we weren't going to go as far as the Bay of Fundy or Eastport, but wanted to get to feel that rugged Maine coast, that bold coast experience. And so it probably didn't take us any much longer to get to Shelburne, Nova Scotia, leaving from Roque than it would have had we left from Bar Harbor. But it was certainly a beautiful spot and we really enjoyed it.
You know, I want to add to that. We love remote places. We spent so much time up in Newfoundland and far north Superior. It's the more remote, the more we love it. We went out to Matinicus Rock and a couple other far out places because that's what we do. We like to challenge ourselves to that. And so, yeah, if you're not going to realize that or want to do that, it's not your experience. But that's why we do it. And besides, you know, there's so much to do up there. The more remote, the better.
Hey, Deb.
And we wouldn't go anywhere without AIS and radar, both. AIS and radar, especially with all the fog. We wouldn't go anywhere without it, would we, John?
No, I don't think I'd go from a slip to the fuel dock without AIS these days.
That's all right. I just watched a boat go hit the docks in St. Martin with AIS, but that's okay. So the next question. Oh, and I want to introduce someone who's on the panelist. Tori Salvia, he has the Sailing Channel TV and he's a film producer and he's helping us do a lot of work on SSCA. I just wanted to give a shout out to him. He's down there kind of quietly.
Thank you, Joan. I've just been monitoring. It's a wonderful presentation. I was when this thing started, I was saying knee deep into my DC panel as I had all of a sudden problem that I needed to fix. So I switched it to just listen. No problems fixed because of my stupidity. But every time you fix a problem, you learn something, you get a little less stupid. So, but wonderful. I'd like to say hello to everybody here. Your presentations were very professional and very wonderful. I have never been to Maine by boat. That's it's on my bucket list. We'll see whether we make it this year. I guess COVID will have a lot to do with that. I just got my second COVID shot today, so I'm going to find out how that's going to affect me tomorrow morning. So again, thank you, everybody.
Hey, Tori, thank you for joining us. Now, another question, and I think this again is for Deb and John. Where is a good departure point from Maine to Nova Scotia? Although that might work for Keith or Dick and Moira.
Yep. Yeah. You guys.
Well, like I mentioned.
Yep. John, are you going to go? Okay.
Yeah, I'll go first. We mentioned leaving from Roque, and that's fairly down east, but you can leave from the Cape Cod Canal and head to Nova Scotia if you want to, but then you'd miss Maine. But it's fairly easy to get across. You find your weather window. Make sure it's comfortable when you want to get there, and it's usually an overnight, maybe 2 full days to get there.
We've sailed to Nova Scotia about 5 times, and as John pointed out, there's multiple places where you can go from. We've gone from Rockland, we've gone from Long Island, which is one of those sort of outlying islands. Yeah. And we've also come back into Mount Desert. There's a couple of things that you need to be aware of is that the current that goes through the Bay of Fundy will sweep you one way or the other. The other thing that you really need to consider is if you're going to the southern coast of Nova Scotia, you've got to come around Cape Sable. And that's certainly something that has to be really well planned. A lot of people are hoping to go to Canada, but for right now, the border is closed and they've actually pushed back discussions for another month before they're even going to be looking at that. Another result of the closed borders is that a lot of boats leaving from Maine typically will go to Shelburne. Canada has now closed Shelburne as a port of entry. So you would have to go all the way up to Halifax to do that. Some boats would go from Mount Desert over to Yarmouth. That still requires then for you, if you want to see any of the lovely southern coast, you still have to go around Cape Sable. But there's lots of options. I think what's really curious is that a lot of people don't know is that sailing from Maine to the southern coast of Nova Scotia, you're actually sailing southeast to get around. You think you would be almost going north, but it's actually a southeast direction.
Thank you very much for that.
Joan, I'd like to, can I add a comment here?
Sure.
Active captain has been mentioned several times, but it's pretty much fallen out of favor. Waterway Guide has an interactive program, much like Active Captain. It's current, it's up to date. It's called Waterway Guide Explorer. It can be accessed by a computer or phone.
Yeah, thank you for that. Also, I think they have a new app that just came out. So you just have to look at the different applications as to who's got the most current data. Sometimes they can get behind because people don't update them. It's true of every application and data out there. Now we have some more questions. What are the typical costs of moorings and slips at Jello and Gretchen? Keith, do you want to take that one?
Well, I can certainly start there. In our area, the mooring costs have been raising slightly in the last couple of years, but they're $35 to $40 for a night. And there are reductions in that for weekly and monthly at most of the operators here in the Rockland area. So that's, I would say that Rockland is probably on the low end of average in those costs. As you work your way up into, I think Camden is a little bit more. So that might be the 40 to 45 range. Now, I haven't used one up there in about 3 years. So that's my memory talking. I hope it's accurate. Beyond that, I'm not sure what the prices are out there now. It's something I need to check back into as the season begins to start.
Yeah, Dick or Moira or John and Deb, any thoughts on mooring costs? We're muted.
Yeah, no, we've actually not ever used a mooring ball
Okay.
that I can recall in Maine.
Bay.
That's right. In Booth Bay Harbor,
It's $35.
it was $35, and that was just a couple years ago.
Okay. All right. I figure, we probably figure in the, 35, 45, maybe 50-ish, maybe a bit, depends on where it is. You just have to call and check. Another question, curious, from Glenn Holt. He asked, is Towboat US available in Maine?
Yes and no.
Oh, I love those answers.
Yeah. Technically, Towboat US has service in Maine. The last I knew, a boat to rescue you would be coming up from Booth Bay, which is 50 miles. So
From Rockland.
to get to Rockland there, to get to the Penobscot Bay. So you kind of don't want to depend on it, I think is what it comes down to, unless you're close to a population center like Portland.
Okay.
Yep, I'll just add a little bit to that, Joan. Between CTOW and Towboat US, there's 5 different service areas. There is one, or had been, maybe Keith and you know that better, there had been one in Castine. So the thing is, really, once you go past Penobscot Bay, for you to call them, it could take several hours to even get there. So it's not something that you would want to depend upon. Further south, then it may be more of a service. But realistically, once you get past Penobscot Bay, it wouldn't be anything that you would depend on.
Okay, well, thank you for that. They did ask if there's a commercial, if these moorings have a vessel size or weight upper limit.
They do. But you have to ask what that mooring is. I mean,
Now from Beth Berry. I'm planning on sailing back to Maine after the Marblehead to Halifax race. Would like to make landfall up by Bar Harbor. I'm not saying it right. Mount Desert. Any local knowledge to advise? We've been there many seasons, mostly to Penobscot Bay. Landfall, local knowledge for the, I think you went over that in your slides, John and Deb, for Mount Desert area.
Mhm.
Any comments, Deb?
I would say it's going to be tricky. Make your reservation far ahead. They're talking about picking up a dock.
I'm not sure if it
Is
was
that what?
your docks. Okay,
Okay, they need to be reserved pretty far ahead.
yeah,
There's also the piers and the floats, but there are private moorings and other public moorings. And the harbor master has his own moorings too. So you've got 3 different places you can call and find out. But
Yeah,
if,
she can also consider southwest and northeast harbors. They both have, good facilities for the
okay.
transient boater.
Now, John and Jan on Figment asked about 2 strategies to see Maine: work your way east, then run back, or run to the west and slowly return. Any preference? I think it depends on the wind, but John?
Keeping in mind that your prevailing winds are southwest during the summer.
Yeah,
So it's going to be a run as you head down east. And it's probably going to be a beat coming back. So depending on the type of sailing or motoring you like to do, that's your preference.
now we have a lot of new messages coming in. I'm going to ask everyone who's still on. There's actually 44 still on, and I think there's about 50 on YouTube. All of the chat and messages are saved with this recording, and we will answer questions if it seems important, or we'll answer the chat questions afterwards and send out to the people that attend. They say that Roque is very special. Eastport's a good stop. Best location to hang out between crews. More messages are coming in. Do you trust Navionics charts and information in the main waters such as current?
Yeah.
The answer is yes. One thing that everyone should do is always get the most current charts. I don't care if it's rock and it doesn't change very much, but the most current charts are critical. And NOAA has started changing its rules for paper charts. It's now using electronic navigation chart information, not rasters, not updating the rasters or the PDFs. You download it from NOAA. A lot of our electronic devices don't download from NOAA, so there's a problem. From Sally and Lindsay, last summer there were no docks available in Bar Harbor, all pulled for the summer due to COVID. Anyone have any information if anything's available here there? No.
So far as I know, a lot of that hasn't been determined yet. We're still waiting.
So keep in touch. So basically, we're coming up to 2 hours of talking. I think everybody's tired, but you've done a wonderful, wonderful job. So Keith and Nikki, thank you so much. Everyone remember his email address. He's in Rockland, Maine. We have Dick and Moria, John and Deb. Thank you all so very much. Rudy and Jill hanging in there and offering advice. They'll be found up in the Chesapeake this summer. They'll be giving presentations on mooring and whatnot. We'll keep track of them as they meander north. And we'll see Tony at Tori Salvia up in the Chesapeake for a bit too. And maybe he'll see you up there, Keith, in Maine. So thank you all very much. Thank you everyone for listening to us. Does anyone have any last comments or thoughts for anyone?
Thank you.
Great
Thank
job.
you. Great job, everybody.
Well, thank you, everyone. And we are going to end this session. Have a wonderful evening. Have a wonderful